invitation to record this lecture for the Gaidai Forum. I'd like to talk to you about technological progress, especially artificial intelligence and digitalization and robots, and participation in global value chains. I'm Hайн Rulfsema. I work at Utrecht University. This is joint research with Yi Zhang. She's from Yaotong University in China. I'm also engaged in work with the Higher School of Economics in Moscow and in Innopolis in Kazan. So let me introduce the topic. So I think that there's lots of evidence that participation in global value chains, which is basically vertical value chains that connect companies in international trade, is a very important thing for economic development. It's not that lots of people export anymore just to sell to customers. Much of the trade is intermediate trade. This is also highlighted by the most recent World Development Report, which is focusing completely on the benefits of participation in global value chains. More and more we see that digital infrastructure, you can think of IT, artificial intelligence, but also of course currently blockchain, is very important to participate in these global value chains. Especially if it can be connected with medium-skilled labor, it provides a good mix of value adding in intermediate goods trades. And then we also see that I'm part of the joint Russia-the Netherlands Ministerial Working Group in Innovation, that also from Russia, but also from the Netherlands. There's lots of interest in building strategic alliances that leverage IT skills and artificial intelligence skills from Russia, and to connect to companies also from the Netherlands to build these value chains and to participate in global trade through those chains. However, on a fourth bullet, what we know is that, and you can think of it, is that artificial intelligence, robotizations, is not only helping the productivity of labor, but it can also be competing with labor. So you can think of, if this is the revolution, which kind of countries and industries would be particularly vulnerable with respect to automation. And this is an important topic also from a political perspective. We see a lot of backlash against globalization all around the world. And one of the reasons might be that there is increased income inequality within and across countries, which is also blamed, you would say, to technological progress. So in this paper, we use a lot of new data where we look closer into the connection between robotization and the country's participation in global value chains. Okay, so a bit of literature related. There's now, I would say, a standard body of literature focusing a lot on Acemoglu and Restrepo's analysis of a canonical model on the effects of automation and robotization on employment. And there's, let's say, a traditional economics argument where you would say, well, in contrast to what a lot of non-economists would say, is that technological progress is actually quite good for labor because simply it improves productivity. And if it improves productivity and we have well-functioning labor markets, this is actually good for wage levels. So if it is especially complementary to labor, then there should be not such a big problem over time. Because you simply increase productivity, which then relates into higher wages. However, you can say, well, maybe there is it's not that simple, because it could also be that intelligence software eats the world, as Baldwin has said, and therefore there's a substitution effect for machines and for labor for machines. So you have less demand for labor because of artificial intelligence. And therefore actually labor might be pushed out into a low productivity service economy or agriculture, but a service economy would be more of the modern world, I would say. So lots of people in low paying jobs in, let's say, the Starbucks kind of thing. That can also be high skilled people, but not skilled to work with automation. So this kind of thinking follows a long tradition, largely empirical debate on what is important for economic development? Is it basically technology or trade shocks that play a role? And only recently you can say, well, what is the connection actually? So if there's a connection between what we think we see between robotization and artificial intelligence and productivity and therefore attractiveness of global value chains, there should be a link between participation in global value chains, which is the trade link to economic development, and artificial intelligence. And there's only very limited evidence of that. Country level evidence from the US and some parsimonious cross-country analysis by the Bakker for the OECD countries. So there's a bit of work to do, and that is what we pick up in this paper. So we put some emphasis here on that GVC are important for future income growth. We are interested in the effects of robotization on global value chain participation, both backward. Backward means that you use foreign inputs in your exports, and forward, which means that actually other countries use your inputs into their exports, which is more, let's say, a higher level value in higher level in value chain. What we use is we use the database from the World Development Report, which is kindly provided by the World Bank, which gives a nice overview of industry country level data on GVC participation based on input-output models, and we use some proprietary data from the International Federation of Robotics, which are also country and industry level. So we matched those. We have country industry participation, therefore, in GVCs, and panel regressions where this robot intensity that we actually scale by export by industry for countries over industries in years. So quite a big database and lots of. What we also try to do is a difference in difference assessment, where we differentiate across industry characteristics and regional and country characteristics, because we're interested to see whether GVC's participation and robotics has a bigger effect in certain countries or certain industries on GVC participation, to draw some kind of a map on where we can in the future think that automation and digitalization will have the biggest impact. Okay, so let me talk about some of the baseline results. So we do this regression where the dependent variable is participation in backward and forward value chains, and we're basically interested in the level of robots and robotics over the employment measure in the past on this kind of participation. And the first, let's say, baseline result is that we see a clear positive correlation between those. So our baseline result, if we control for quite a few things that are commonly controlled for in GVC participation, and we can see that our variable adds a lot. So the first set of evidence would be is that yes, if we control for many things, including the fixed effects, we see that robotics does at the industry country level has a positive effect on GVC participation as a baseline result. Clearly, you'd like to see more in-depth this difference in different things. So we start off with sectoral interaction terms. So where we establish, let's say, some circumstantial evidence kind of story, where we would say, well, the more labor intense the sector is, the more important the robotics is. So labor intensive sectors, higher levels of effects of robots. If there are more skills, then it's also good for backward participation. Now, keep in mind those two effects. So on the one hand, you see that labor-intensive sectors profit, I would say, more from robotics, but also skill-intensive. So in the subset, what you see, and that's important for developing countries, is that the combination of labor intensity and skill intensity actually builds up towards higher levels of inequality here. Very loosely as a first shot here. We come back to the country level. Then we have some more direct things, like we have some measures from other papers on replaceability, And clearly there are negative effects. So the more replaceability is higher, then clearly there's more effect of robots on participation. So that's, let's say, the opportunity that you have of complementing labor for robots. So yeah, especially in labor-intensive sectors where replaceability is high and skill intensity high, there is a strong emphasis on the positive effects of robots. Also, contract intensity, often a measure of complexity and productivity, substantial positive effect. Depends a bit on, of course, the measurement here, but positive effect that higher levels of contract intensity, therefore more complexity, result in higher positive effects of robotization. So yes, labor intense, but complex. So that combination is important. If we go to the country level interactions, then they're more or less mirrored. So for countries that have a high level of labor intensity, which you could basically say as emerging markets and less developed countries, positive but non-significant effect, but not so much an effect on backward participation, but in forward participation seems to be important. Positive effect with low skill intensity. Again, if you combine it with the previous results, it's interesting that yes, if you have at the country level low skill intensity, but at the sector level high skill intensity, you tend to benefit. And especially the combination of those two is quite vital for the analysis. Okay. And it's forward participation substantially important for Asian countries where the factory of the world, which is the discussion on climbing up into the value chain. Now, endogeneity concerns in economics, obviously, you'd be concerned where you would say, well, but isn't it the case that if countries have a higher incentive to participate in global value chains, that they then also have higher levels of innovation with respect to robotics? So you want to filter out that effect. How you normally do that is that you have some kind of exogenous components that are correlated with the level of robotics, but are not that much correlated with GVC participation. So then you often look at the initial robotic stock, or you match it with the stocks in similar industries of similar income countries, whereas in those countries the GVC participation would be low. So you see whether that correlation is there, which purely is, let's say, a sector kind of effect. I'm not going too much deeper in it, but the thing is that both coefficients, if I check for endogeneity with instrumental variables, also perform quite well. Okay, so I think that we have a robust conclusion that there's a causal connection between the increases in robotics and participation in global value chains. And it strengthens the story by all these kind of interaction effects that we include. We also show that these effects are larger in labor-intensive industries and sectors where labor is highly replaceable, and in contract-intensive complex production. And highly skilled sectors in robotics are then connected only in backward participation. And so there is this third one is the combination between those effects, that it is in labor-intensive sectors, but positive skill effects in sectors together with a string of effects in low-skilled countries that might actually be worrying from a rising inequality point of view between countries. So that is actually the policy agenda. A few of extensions. So first, of course, you could say, well, how does this inform policymakers' work? So what should we do with it? So I think that there's already an old argument going back to the Sir David Greenaway, famous international economist, who argued that we have to be careful with the more traditional theories of international trade, which stress, let's say, comparative advantages, and therefore labor would benefit from globalization in the developed world. Where if you would say, if integration is very much a skill-favoring component, then especially in low and income countries, that would increase within country inequality and therefore might actually reduce the foundations of trade liberalization. So there is a bit of evidence in our paper that if we look at the more recent fourth industrial revolution of AI, this is actually again happening, where you would say, well, the people who can work with AI in developed economies and emerging markets are actually the high-skilled people, and therefore them, let's say, the productivity effects will be quite positive, and the connection effects with GVCs would also be positive. So that would run counter to a broad-based development strategies. And that these are big countries, you know, China, India, etc. So immediately has also a volume effect on the support for global trade. So also there's a debate started by Daniel Roderick on premature deindustrialization. So he saw in many of his data that lots of developing and middle income countries wanted to go for increased industrialization through manufacturing to create good jobs in political terms. However, that this service economy, especially low productivity service economy, so the coffee shops, were skipping the step of industrialization seen in many other countries, especially also in Asian countries. So you could say, well, yeah, GVCs is good, but if that goes together with lots of introduction of artificial intelligence, for example, and robotics, maybe you also, together with GVC participation, see a lot of premature deindustrialization. So it actually can go together. You see more participation in rural trade, but you also see less participation because of the deindustrialization of countries. Third thing is that digitalization pumps up the role of services in GVCs. And what we see in many of the trade data is that international services grow much quicker than trade in manufacturing goods. Maybe COVID is a bit like taking a bit of a huddle here, but a bit of a hurdle out of it. But I think that there's a lot of, let's say, tensions that if you look at the level of liberalization globally of trade and services, that lags far behind trade in manufacturing good, where lots of tariffs have actually been nullified. So there's an open question, is that if digitalization, so instead of making products, making software and zeros and ones, and providing that as a service and software as a service, is how is the interaction between manufacturing and services organized? And therefore, should we not work more towards liberalization of trade and services? And I'm working with a large consortium for the European Commission on that question. And last thing is, I would say that on the policy leads, is that the elephant in the room is clearly COVID-19. So let's say the default thing is that a lot of people would argue that COVID-19 is likely to speed up a lot of trends. And the most obvious trends is digitalization and automation, because it then reduces also physical contact and also in trade the need probably to ship a lot. So so maybe the future tensions of inequality will arise quicker because of the increased automation and robotization, and therefore the restructuring of global value chains due to the current pandemic. So research agendas, I think that there's a big agenda now going on, is that this is about GVC participation, etc., but to connect that agenda to job profiles. There's also connection to what is called job polarization. So if you claim that these kind of things would lead to higher inequality, you also would have a connection to the debate that we see rising numbers of jobs at the really high end that makes use of technology, and the really low end, which is low tech but is service related. So connecting those data with, let's say, data on job polarization is a key thing. Even going a bit down, you can say it's not only about the jobs itself that the OECD, for example, is doing, but looking at the skills and the task levels in those jobs and how do they change because of automation and globalization. So I think that the last thing to stress here is that artificial intelligence is really about prediction, and there's a lot of this kind of roboting data and automation data. But I think that what we've not seen fully is that AI will lower barriers of entry and provides lots of incentives. And I do a current consultancy on air cargo, and there, for example, you see Amazon moving big time in air cargo, and their competitive thing is that they start to use this kind of digital services as a much better prediction of cargo flows. So the point here is that we can have this from a static perspective, what we have, but we see a lot of industry restructuring going on in global value chains where the role of technology is constantly shifting. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to send me an email. And I hope that the Gaidar Forum in this way, unluckily we cannot meet, will be a big success. Thank you all for listening.